Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, good evening, everyone. So we are still trying to work our way through the Gemara of HaTsad Chilazon, and I wanted to try and look at the Machlokes Rishonim about what exactly Rava means when he says Afilu Tema Shabbat Zechai Misasik Ku Eitzel Nesilas Neshama. And the Gemara's answer, Shani Hocha de Kamat is bein Neshama to Fei Nichele Keicha to Litzon Sivin. So just to remind ourselves of the maths of the sugya, the Gemara is asking why one is not chayev when extracting the dye from the Chilazon. Why is one not chayev for Netilas Neshama, for ending the life of the Chilazon? And Rabbi Yochanan says we're talking about a case where you extract the dye once it's dead, and Rava says the person extracting the dye is misasek eitzel netilas neshama. Now, whatever exactly this term misasek eitzel netilas neshama means, it's somewhere in the region of he's not intending, not fully intending, is somewhat disinterested in the death of the Chilazon. And therefore, he's doing something else. He's extracting dye, and the death of the Chilazon is in some way or other an unfortunate byproduct. On that, the Gemara asks, okay, I understand it's a byproduct, a side result of what he's doing, but surely this is a psik reisha, a definite side result. And Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda both agree that in a case of psik reisha, you're chayev. On that, the Gemara answers, no, because you don't want it to die. You prefer it not to die because dying affects the quality of the dye that is produced, and therefore you don't want, when you extract the Chilazon from the Chilazon, you don't wish to cause its death. So somewhere the flow of the Gemara is something like when you're extracting the dye, you don't intend to kill it. On that, the Gemara says, but yes, but it will definitely happen. And the Gemara's answer is, no, you would prefer it not to happen. That's the flow of the Gemara. But what exactly are the halachic principles at work here? When the Gemara says it's misasek, and when the Gemara answers, no, you'd prefer it not to die in order to ensure that the tseva, the color that comes out from the Chilazon, is clear. So I want to, unusually in this case, start with Tosfos' pshat in the sugya. And the reason I want to do this is because even though Tosfos' pshat presents considerable difficulties, at least we can be relatively confident about what Tosfos is saying. Whereas Rashi's pshat is very difficult. It's very hard to work out what Rashi means at all in his reading of the sugya. So let's try and work our way through Tosfos. So first of all, when the Gemara says it's misasek, we should know as an introduction to this that misasek is a technical term. Misasek means you're engaged in something else, and there's an extensive Gemara that discusses what misasek means, both earlier in our Perek, a sugya that we didn't cover before the Mishnah, which lists the 39 melachos, and also a sugya in Krisus, and a sugya that appears in several other places in Shas. Misasek generally is a code word for where I am completely oblivious to something that's happening on the side, and in fact I'm positively engaged in doing a different action. For example, I pick some flowers off the ground, and I'm completely unaware of the fact that the flowers are in fact growing from the ground. I thought they fell from my vase that I just dropped. So a vase is knocked off the table, falls to the ground, the roses fall out of the vase, I bend down to pick up the roses, and without me completely unawares, mixed into these roses that fell off the ground that's already uprooted, I also uproot a rose. So I have a complete lack of awareness of one of the actions that I am doing. Now I want to stress this is different to all the other halachic categories we've discussed. Shogeg means I am aware that I'm picking a rose, uprooting a rose from the ground. I just don't realize this is also, either because I don't realize uprooting is also on Shabbos, or I don't realize today is Shabbos. But I'm fully aware I'm picking it from the ground. Davar she'einu miskavein means I'm aware, again, the action is happening. I'm just not interested in it. Davar she'einu miskavein, there's no kavanah to it. There's no particular interest in it. So I'm dragging the bench along the ground, and I'm aware it's creating a furrow, or might create a furrow. I have just no particular interest in it creating the furrow. So in the rose scenario, that would mean I am aware that I am plucking a rose from the ground. I just have no interest in plucking the leaves from the ground. I want to do something completely different. Similarly, melacha she'ein tzricha legufa is also I'm aware of what I'm doing. More than I'm aware of what I'm doing, I want to do the melacha. Just my intent, my purpose in doing the melacha is too broad for Masechet Shabbat, either because it's removing a problem as per Rashi, or because I'm not doing it for specific intention that parallels why they were doing it in the Mishkan. In all these cases, I'm aware that I'm doing the action. In Shogeg, I'm aware I'm doing the action, I just don't know it's Asa. In Davar She'ein Miskaven, I'm aware that I'm doing the action, I'm just not interested in it. And in Melacha She'ein Tzricha Legufa, I'm aware I'm doing the action and I want to do the Melacha, just my intention in doing the Melacha is Ein Tzricha Legufa, is a side intention rather than the core intention of the Melacha. Misasek is normally used as terminology for a case where I'm oblivious or near oblivious to the action that I'm doing. I'm engaged in something completely different. I'm unaware that I'll be doing this action. I thought I was just picking a rose up off the ground and was completely oblivious to the fact that in fact I was plucking a rose that was growing from the ground and therefore doing a kotza. So misasek generally means a well-recognized halachic concept. Nonetheless, Tosfos here says that in our Gemara, the use of that language is lav dafka. So at least we understand what Tosfos is saying. Even though the Gemara uses the word for misasek, it doesn't really mean that. It really means something else. What does it really mean, says Tosfos? It can't mean misasek, but it means davar she'einu miskavin. It means an unintended side consequence. What's Tosfos' proof it can't mean misasek? Because Tosfos understands that misasek is a concept in Hilchos Shabbos linked to melachas machshavas. So to remind ourselves, melachas machshavas, again, is a halachic concept that crops up throughout Masechet Shabbat. The origin of the word melachas machshavas is not in the pasuk of Shabbos, but is in the pasuk of the building of the Mishkan. And in the building of the Mishkan, the activities done are described as melachas machshavas. They're not just regular melachos, they're melachas machshavas. They are thought through constructive and creative melachos. Something like that is the translation of melachas machshavas. Planned, thought through, constructive melachos, designed melachos, designer melachos. Now we learn out from melachas machshavas an array of dinim. Many halachas are learned out from melachas machshavas, which I'm not going to go into today, other than two concepts which are relevant, at least as far as Tosfos understands, to our topic. Number one, melachas machshavas teaches us that a melacha needs to be constructive rather than mekalkel, rather than destructive. And number two, melachas machshavas teaches us that you are potter for misasek. How does it teach us each of these principles? Well, since it means a designed and designated craftsman-like activity, constructive activity, if I'm doing a mekalkel, I'm potter on Shabbos. It's true there's a purpose in what I'm doing. I want to achieve something. I want to rip up that banknote, that bank check so that no one can use it against me. I want to erase that writing so that no one can read my diary. However, it's fundamentally a destructive act. I'm destroying writing rather than creating writing. I want to dismantle this furniture so that I can put it more easily into my wheelie bin. However, it's fundamentally a destructive act rather than a constructive act. Melachas machshavas means constructive. So this is halacha number one. Halacha number two is misasek. Why is misasek excluded from melachas machshavas? Well, very easily so. Melachas machshavas means an intended, designed action. Misasek is completely unintentional and undesignated. Now, obviously, if I'm misasek, I'll be shogeg because I'm unaware of what I was doing. That's not the question of here. We're not talking about shogeg. With shogeg, I've done the melacha just by mistake, and therefore I have to bring a carbon chatos. With misasek, it's a deeper mistake. I'm completely unaware of the action that I've done, and therefore Tosfos says this would also be learned from melachas machshavas, that this is not a melacha at all. It's not that I've done a melacha by mistake. I haven't done a melacha at all because a melacha means a form of constructive and intentional activity. When I do something b'shogeg on Shabbos, such as harvesting on Shabbos, it is a constructive, intentional activity. I'm harvesting. I just don't realize that harvesting is also because I don't realize it's a melacha, or I don't realize that today is Shabbos. With misasek, it's not a melachas machshavas. It's not a melacha with respect to Shabbos at all, because it's not a designated, designed activity, because I was oblivious to the fact that I was doing it at all. So to summarize, melachas machshavas is a term used by Mishkan. But since we learn the melachos of Shabbos from Mishkan, we also cross-transfer the fact that it's not any old melachos, it's only melachos machshavas, which are forbidden on Shabbos. A melacha is only also on Shabbos, it's only chayv on Shabbos, it's only a melacha in truth, the sort of melacha that we're talking about on Shabbos, when it is melachos machshavas, which excludes mekalkel and excludes misasik. Says Tosfos, since the malacha that we're talking about over here is the malacha of chaburah, it happens to be that malacha of chaburah is not the concept of melachos mashavas doesn't apply to mekalkel chaburah. Why doesn't it apply to mekalkel chaburah? Meaning to say, the malacha of doing an injury, let me specify what I mean. But the malacha we're dealing over here is that of injuring or ending life, netilas neshama. All injury and ending life, netilas neshama, is generally mekalkel, it's generally destructive. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that mekalkel of chaburah is potter, is chayiv. I'm sorry. Let me get this right. Rabbi Yehuda holds that mekalkel of chaburah is potter because it's mekalkel. Rabbi Shimon holds that mekalkel of chaburah is an exception to the general rule, and mekalkel of chaburah is chayiv. Why is mekalkel of chaburah chayiv? Because mekalkel is a fundamentally destructive malacha, and therefore chaburah is a fundamentally constructive malacha. Injuring is fundamentally destructive, and nonetheless the Torah says this is a malacha. Therefore, mekalkel of a chaburah is different to all other malachas, and you are chayiv. To summarize what we've said, because I became a little confused with the names, in generally with 38 malachas, mekalkel is potter because it's not melachos mashavas. However, Rabbi Shimon is of the view that when it comes to chaburah, mekalkel is chayiv. It's an exception. What's his source that mekalkel is chayiv? A rather technical source. He understands that the Torah has to explicitly allow a bris milah on Shabbos, because otherwise we would have said that bris milah is forbidden on Shabbos because it's chaburah, it's creating an injury. Why does the Torah have to specifically allow a bris milah on Shabbos? Surely anyway it would be allowed because it's mekalkel. Says Rabbi Shimon, I have my proof. Evidently, mekalkel on Shabbos is, a mekalkel of chaburah is chayiv, and chaburah is an exception. So just to, did you lose me there, or did I lose internet for a little bit? No, you can hear me, Okay.
I've got it, yeah.
Fine, okay. So just to summarize, with 38 malachas, mekalkel is not melachos mashavas in your potter. Rabbi Shimon holds that with chaburah, mekalkel is chayev, and the proof of this is because the Torah had to explicitly allow bris milah on Shabbos. Why does the Torah have to explicitly allow it? Surely it's mekalkel. Rabbi Shimon holds, therefore, we have proof that mekalkel of chaburah is forbidden on Shabbos.
Can I just ask a question on that, Rabbi Zobin? Yeah. So there are other types of melachot which are also destructive in nature. You know, we've obviously seen soter and tofer and all these other ones. You're saying that those mekalkels activities are inherently different for some reason to mekalkel b'chaburah. Even hoesh, you could ask you, is a type of destroying, ground. So why does mekalkel b'chaburah inherently is chayiv or could be chayiv, while the other mekalkels are potter?
An excellent question. I'm not arguing that from reason alone we could have learned out this distinction. I'm simply arguing that chaburah is an example of a malacha where we may think that naturally speaking it's mekalkel, and Rabbi Shimon learns out from bris milah that indeed this is the case, and the malacha is chayiv even for mekalkel. You could imagine chaburahs which are constructive. You can imagine dismantling a building that's constructive. How can dismantling a building be constructive when it's almanas livnot, where you're dismantling in order to rebuild? How can erasing writing be constructive, where you're erasing in order to rewrite? So we could have thought up scenarios of where chaburah would be constructive, not mekalkel. Rabbi Shimon proves from bris that we don't need to do so, and that the chiddush of chaburah is that it is a malacha even though it is fundamentally destructive. Now, and what's the evidence for that? Bris milah. We learn out from bris milah. Now, Tosfos says, what would this mean to say that mekalkel with a chaburah is chayiv? Surely it can't be. It's not melachos mashavas. Melachos mashavas means a designed, creative malacha. Tosfos understands the logic of how mekalkel b'chaburah is chayiv according to Rabbi Shimon. It must mean that he holds there's no requirement for melachos mashavas for chaburah. Now, this piece of reasoning is not definite. You could have said that mekalkel b'chaburah is chayiv, and mekalkel is the only exception. Chaburah is like all other malachas, with one exception, that you're chayiv for mekalkel. Tosfos wants to reason. He wants to understand what would it mean to say that mekalkel with chaburah is chayiv. Surely it's not a melachos mashavas. It must be that actually what we're really learning out is a more general principle that you don't need melachas masheves at all for the melacha of chaburah. Chaburah isn't just an exception against the other 38 that you're chayv from a kalkel. Chaburah is an exception against the other 38 that there's no requirement for melachas masheves at all. In which case, the other halachas learned out from melachas masheves also wouldn't apply for chaburah. Now, since misasek is learned out from melachas masheves, the problem with misasek is that I am oblivious to the action I'm doing, and if it's not a designated, targeted action, that requirement wouldn't apply to chaburah, argues Tosfos. So in brief, Tosfos argues that we can't translate the Gemara literally. The Gemara can't mean to say that the exemption over here with chaburah is because it's misasek, it's an act done in an oblivious manner, because that's learned out from melachas masheves, and we know that chaburah is an exception to the principle of melachas masheves. You don't need melachas masheves in chaburah. How do I know you don't need it in chaburah? Because with chaburah you're even chayav for makalkel according to Rabbi Zobin. So in brief, Tosfos learns out that we can't translate the Gemara literally, that the Gemara means that the exemption is misasek. Now again, one could unpick that argument, you could disagree, you could say Tosfos can't extrapolate from a kalkel to all the rules of melachas masheves, but that's not what Tosfos says. Tosfos' view is that the only coherent way of explaining how you can be chayav from a kalkel with chaburah is because the rule of melachas masheves doesn't apply, in which case misasek also wouldn't apply. Says Tosfos, therefore, what does the Gemara mean when it says that you're chayav for, what does the Gemara mean when it explains why you should be exempt for being put the Chilazon, for killing the Chilazon or injuring it in the process of extracting its blood? When it says misasek, it means it's an unintended side consequence. I knew when I was extracting the blood of the Chilazon that I would kill it or might kill it. I wasn't oblivious to that. That's not misasek. However, I had no interest in that. It was an unintended side consequence. I want to drag my bench from the garden into the house. The fact that it creates a furrow is completely of disinterest to me. It's an unintended side consequence. Dover she'enu miskavin, so says Tosfos. Now, Dover she'enu miskavin, this fits very well, because Dover she'enu miskavin, according to Rabbi Shimon, is mutter on Shabbos. Why is it mutter on Shabbos? Well, part of the answer is that actually it's mutter during the whole week too. Meaning to say, Dover she'enu miskavin is not a unique halacha with respect to Hilchos Shabbos. It's a halacha that applies to many other isurim in the Torah too. And Tosfos brings an example of that, of mochrei kususim, people who are selling garments and they wish to model the garments and they have no interest in the garments doing garmenting function, like keeping them warm or protecting them. Their only interest is in modeling the fall of the garments and displaying the goods they wish to sell to potential customers. This is a Dover she'enu miskavin, and in that sugya there you also have a machlokes Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, where the Dover she'enu miskavin is prohibited, is asa min haTorah. So Dover she'enu miskavin is not what we call a Shabbos din. It's not a Shabbos halacha. It's a general kol haTorah kula halacha. It's a halacha of kol haTorah kula that Dover she'enu miskavin, according to Rabbi Shimon, is not included in the Surah Torah, and according to Rabbi Yehuda is. So Tosfos says, okay, that's a whole Torah principle. That's not just a Shabbos halacha. Therefore, of course, that would apply to chaburah. The chaburah is only different to other melachos with respect to one detail, melachas masheves. But Dover she'enu miskavin was never a melachas masheves law. It was a law of kol haTorah kula, and therefore, this is what the Gemara really means. The reason you are not chayav for killing the Chilazon is because it's an unintended side consequence, which is not a leniency in Shabbos, it's a general principle in the whole Torah. Yeah.
Sorry, about the Shatnez example, there's two different situations about what the model was doing there, which might be slightly different as to how much it's she'enu mikaven. One is that he arrives at work to model the Shatnez clothes, and he says, well, I'm going to be wearing Shatnez clothes that will keep me warm. I don't particularly want to wear the Shatnez clothes, but I'm going to take off my clothes and put on the Shatnez clothes. And I'm only really wearing them because I'm being paid and it's my job and I'm modeling them. And the other is that he says, no, he could only wear them really if he kept his own clothes on, and put the other clothes on over the top. So he's really not getting any hana from them at all. Which of those situations is it? Because that also would appear to model into our Chilazon example.
It's a good point. It would appear it's, I think, what you call the former, where he's still wearing his clothes underneath, and therefore he's not getting anything. He has no interest in what the clothes are doing. I have to tell you, we are already struggling with the fact that this is a shas sugya, and therefore, in a sense, I'm trying to delineate what we go into, and the number of halachic concepts that come up in the sugya are literally mind-boggling. They're overwhelmingly hard, and therefore I'm sort of deliberately not going into the sharpness thing in too much detail. And I'm just stating a fact that Tosfos understands it to be a kol haTorah kula principle. One of the most important and fundamental pieces of reasoning from Reb Chaim Brisker that really went into Reb Chaim Brisker's enduring fame as a remarkable London is about this issue of Dor She'eino Miskavein and this point of Tosfos that in which Tosfos says that you're not chayav for that Dor She'eino Miskavein is a kol haTorah kula dikadin. Those who are interested in a little bit of extension work, or more accurately, a large amount of extension work, and perhaps when we take a break over the summer holidays, I'm very happy to give you a scan of this piece of Reb Chaim, and there may even be somewhere floating around an English summary of it, and working it through is a remarkable intellectual tour de force of Reb Chaim. So I'm really trying to cut our way through what's an incredibly complicated topic with clarity, and therefore for now, all I will say is that Tosfos is arguing that Dor She'eino Miskavein is not a unique Shabbos halacha, but is a halacha that applies to all Isurim, and therefore the space in the interest of simplicity, I'm going to assume it's a case where the model really has no interest in it because they're wearing their own clothes anyway. Okay, so says Tosfos, this is what the Gemara
Sorry, question.
Oh, yeah.
So I understand that. I think I understand what you're saying with Melachot Machshava. You're saying that Mekalkel and Mitasek, they are halachot that are derived from Melachot Machshava in the sense that we understand what Melachot Machshava is that it's a designed constructive activity, and therefore not those Mekalkel and Mitasek would not be. Which you're saying is not the case with Dor She'eino Miskavein, which is a kol haTorah kula sort of concept. But why does it seems to me that the Dor She'eino Miskavein would still exclude it from being in the Melachot Machshava category, right? It's still just because it's not derived from it. It's still not a melacha by design. Which, if you hold that, then that I think the argument in the Gemara sort of starts to fall apart, right?
Okay, so you're heading into Reb Chaim territory in your question, and it's genuinely a superb question. Reb Chaim argues that Dor She'eino Miskavein is both a kol haTorah kula halacha and a Shabbos halacha, for the reasons you're stating, which is it's true it's a principle in kol haTorah kula, but surely it would also not be melachos Shabbos and therefore also have Shabbos aspects to it. However, for our purposes, in terms of the logic of Tosfos, we don't need to worry about that, because let's say you are correct and Reb Chaim is correct, right? And let's say that for Shabbos, there's two reasons why one would be exempt for Dor She'eino Miskavein, because of the general kol haTorah principle, and because with Shabbos it wouldn't be melachos Shabbos. But Tosfos' point is over here that Mekalkel doesn't have the normal rule of Dor She'eino of melachos Shabbos, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Mekalkel is potter, because melachos Shabbos doesn't apply by Mekalkel. In which case, the melachos Shabbos aspect of Dor She'eino Miskavein wouldn't be relevant here. Nonetheless, as Tosfos, we can fall back on the kol haTorah kula aspect of Dor She'eino Miskavein, and that would be sufficient to explain Rava's answer as to why you're potter in this case.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so that's the logic of Tosfos. Now, if this is what the Gemara is saying, Tosfos carries on by therefore reading the rest of the flow of the Gemara accordingly. It's a Dor She'eino Miskavein, it's an unintended side consequence. But on that, the Gemara establishes a principle that you can't claim unintended side consequences when it is a pesik reisha, when it is a definite result. Meaning, something which is a pesik reisha, a definite consequence that is going to happen, you can't argue is an unintended side consequence. You can't say this is a side consequence. It's inherent in the action that I've done. And therefore, the exemption of kol haTorah kula of Dor She'eino Miskavein would not apply in a scenario of a sick ratio or something that inevitably happens. You can argue that this is an unintended side consequence when it might happen, it might not, and therefore I can say I have no particular interest in doing it. But for sick ratio of a can you claim that when you chop a head off a chicken in order to play football with a head, the death of the chicken is an unintended side consequence? That's what sick ratio means. You can't argue it's an unintended side consequence. Hence the question of the Gemara, which it challenges Rava and says, how can you claim that the concept of Dover She'ein Miskavin is relevant over here? Even Rabbi Shimon agrees that by Dover She'ein Miskavin, where it is a sick ratio, a definite side consequence, you are chayiv. On that, the Gemara answers, according to Tosfos' reasoning, that a unintended side consequence, which is definite, is indeed not a Dover She'ein Miskavin. To put it differently, it's a Dover She'ein Miskavin. It is called an intended action. However, if it's lo nichale, if you don't want or don't care about the result, then it is another halachic principle of melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Because melacha she'ein tzricha legufa, which is very much a Shabbos principle, it's not a kol haTorah kula principle, means that the melachos of Shabbos have to be done, according to Tosfos, for the same purpose as they were done in the Mishkan. I have to have a purpose in doing melachos. Melacha she'ein tzricha legufa is not misasik. I'm aware I'm doing it. It's not shogeg. I know that this is perhaps also. It's not Dover She'ein Miskavin. It's not an unintended side consequence. I want to do the melacha. However, I have to do it melacha sh'tzricha legufa. I have to do it for a specific target, for a specific goal. And since here I have no interest in the death of the Chilazon, therefore this is a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. It's a melacha which is an unintended a melacha which the purpose of doing the melacha is not one that interests me. Now, melacha she'ein tzricha legufa, according to Rabbi Shimon, is potter, and therefore that is the explanation of Rava's answer, in which he said this is a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. So, can I quote the person who posted the chat on the group? Yeah, no, because as Adam just posted to me in the chat, the Gemara flows well according to Tosfos. It starts off with the classic principle of Dover She'ein Miskavin. It then introduces the classic principle of Sik Reisha, and then it says, yeah, but this is Lo Nicha. I'm not interested in the result, and therefore this is a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. It's a melacha with a where the result is one that I don't want the outcome, and with melachos you need to do them for a specific target. What are the problems in the reading of Tosfos? Really two problems. Number one, when the Gemara meant Dover She'ein Miskavin, it called it misasek. That's a difficult reading of text. And number two, which is a more generic problem, when the Gemara says that the concept of lo nichale, what the Gemara really means isn't that lo nichale, you don't want it. What the Gemara really means is you don't care about the result, and therefore it's a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. So it's sort of a massive separate halachic principle that suddenly gets thrown in this casual use of the word lo nichale. But what was said is a summary of Tosfos. So we'll stop here because we've run out of time. This is a summary of the view of Tosfos. In Yetz Hashem on Sunday in the Shiur, we will go through Rashi's view, which is far less clear. We will start off by looking at how Tosfos understood Rashi, and why in each of the three stages of reasoning Tosfos argued with Rashi, and then we'll look at Rashi himself and see whether this is the only way to understand Rashi, and whether indeed Rashi meant as Tosfos seems to have understood him, or Rashi meant something different. So that will be the program plotted for Sunday.
Sure.
Jonathan, thank you so much.
Thank you.